Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Jay Smart, and today I'm going to be talking about rethinking graduate writing. Just some ideas about how to progress through this, and we hope this is useful for everyone. So the way we're going to couch this is by doing a couple things. I want to focus on writing, but this really is just kind of a way to think about how to navigate the graduate experience. Something I definitely wish I knew back when I was a grad student. And the way I'm going to couch this is I'm borrowing kind of a concept from human factors, which is this idea that there's often a mismatch between the designer, the actual artifact that the designer creates, and the intended user. And you can think about this in lots of ways. So in our case, the designer would be, say, myself as a faculty member. The user is you as a graduate student, and the artifact or object or system in this case is a potential milestone. So this could be a first-year research project. This could be a master's. This could be comprehensive exams, or this could be your dissertation. And all of them kind of come with assumptions and from the start. And one of the things that we see is there can be these disconnects between either the instructor or myself as an advisor and you as a student in terms of not understanding what kind of things you come in with, between the things that we're asking you to do and your capabilities, or between what we expect and the way we present that expectation in terms of the ways we ask you to complete tasks. So any of those can produce problems and cause stress points. And so what I want to do today is kind of give a few pointers about how we might navigate this. So we'll start with the issues. The first one is kind of this expectation that we have of expertise. And expertise is interesting because it takes time to develop. And so one of the biggest things we do as faculty, and I know I have been guilty of this, is assuming a much more advanced state of being able to physically write than what might be warranted. And the way to think about this, and do not feel bad, this is everybody, is that there isn't any magic that happens between when you graduate from undergrad and when you step a few months later into grad school. There isn't some switch that hits and now all of a sudden you're an expert writer. So the problem is that there's an expectation that now that you have this label of grad student that you have a certain level of expertise from that. And we build assignments or we give tasks that are reflective of that expertise. And that is stressful because then you as a student coming in new, or even if you've been in for a while, may not have that skill set yet. So that's the first thing we have to kind of correct. How do we correct that? The second thing is an expectation of field knowledge. One of the most stressful things we do, particularly new students, is ask them to talk about their research as if they've been doing this for multiple years. And what you need to realize is that as a graduate student, you are still acquiring domain knowledge in whatever topic you're looking at. So you're not going to be able to write this great argument, this expert argument, because you don't know the ins and outs of the field yet. And there's not just sort of the academic part of that, there's also the cultural part of that. So you're still learning that. You're learning kind of the context and culture that your problem exists in and the way that people have addressed it or debated it. And that affects how you make arguments in your written documents as well. So you kind of have to learn all these things as a grad student, but we also make these assumptions that you know these things when you come in. So part of the thing is, can we disentangle that? Can we make this something that what we understand and work from rather than start from the assumptions that are often faulty? So how does this happen? Or where do we learn this? I don't know. And, if you're like most of us that are already faculty, if you're watching this, it was kind of osmosis. You just kind of watch and you followed along and you just kind of mimicked until you got it yourself. Kind of a do or do not kind of thing. It wasn't really any formal instruction. And we've talked to several faculty and we all had kind of the same experience that we just kind of learned, but it wasn't anything formal. It just kind of, you caught on or you didn't. I've got to think there's a better way. And I think that kind of my human factors training gives us that. So I'm going to kind of impart some of that on you guys to talk about what this better way might be. The first way to improve this or to sort of disambiguate this is to recognize that we come in at different levels. And that the level that we come in is probably not the level that most people think we are. And so this is some great work that a couple of my colleagues, Dr. Jennifer Quinn and Dr. Carrie Hall, worked with me on. And we talk about this idea that there are developmental stages, particularly for writing, and also just in general as your growth as a grad student. And part of the process of being in grad school is really just leveling up, is getting past or getting to that next level. To do that, there's a couple things. One is develop your core knowledge. You have to kind of have a knowledge base to work with in order to be able to make the arguments and have this coherent introductions and arguments for your studies to begin with. So you kind of have to know what's there in the field. So that's one of the things that's developing. The second thing is developing a framework, and that knowledge allows you to figure out, okay, what are the trigger points, or what are the holes, or where are the places that I'm going to fit in as a researcher. And again, these are things that you're going to learn through your interaction with your advisor or people that you're working with. And what I would say here is ask the questions. If you're not understanding something or you don't know why this is happening, ask the question. That's really the thing I think we kind of fall flat on, because we're all expecting each other to have expertise in places that we may not. So how do you defeat that? Ask the question. So what do? Ask the question. All right, now I've said it a couple times. Second thing is kind of recognizing where we are. And where most of us are, and I'm going to include myself here, I think I am exiting this realm, but I definitely have been here for a while, is that most of us are in the transforming stage. I think if you look at this chart here, so this first area here is knowledge telling, and it's basically where you're repeating stuff. You can gain factual information, you understand things as this, but you really don't have a good grasp of how everything goes together. And this might be most of our undergraduate experiences. Once we move into grad school and beyond, we kind of end up in this transforming stage. And what's different here is that now we're able to take these pieces and put them together and start to see a bigger picture. We don't quite have all the pieces yet. There's things that we're missing. We're not really generating new ideas at this point. We're just kind of thinking about how these things go together, and that's okay. When you start off, that's okay. The third stage is crafting, and I think this comes just with expertise and time. And like I said, for myself, I think I'm just getting to this stage very recently in this. But you can think about this as that through most grad programs, this is kind of the thing that the milestones will get you to. So as you go from comps, which kind of gives you your expertise, your knowledge base and framework, to your dissertation, which is the first thing that sort of is where your tangible piece of how I now understand my domain. And then post-grad, whether that's being a postdoc, whether it's going to faculty position, whether it's going into industry, now applying this knowledge gives you that additional perspective where now you can start talking about not just what's there, but what should be there and what we should do next for that. And so how do we move from spot to spot? Well, the way we do that is through using principles. And again, this is kind of where my human factors background comes in and why I think this makes stuff used for you. And again, this is stuff I have just learned as well. I'm not claiming to know this, like I may talk like I know this for a long time, but this has been a developmental thing for me too. So that I say that so that you understand that it's okay not to know everything, particularly as a grad student, and that you can build up. So the principles I want to talk about are just things that help you kind of navigate this process and maybe take some of the edge off. The first is to realize that writing is nonlinear. And what that means is that it's going to be messy and it'll become organized initially, but eventually, but that's not how it starts. We don't learn it that way. That's not how it's definitely not how we teach it. We teach it as you start from here, you go from A to B to C. Really, you might start at C, go to B, then jump over to Q, then come back to A. That's really how writing starts. And the thing about this part is that you have to be okay with not knowing. You have to be okay with not having the full structure yet, because you need that discomfort. You need that being okay with knowing there's gaps in order to grow. If you feel like you know everything, or if you feel like you got the whole picture, there's no place to go with that. So be okay with it. That's why you're a student, is being okay. The second part of this is that realizing that writing is also thinking. It's not just mechanics, but it's thought process. It's how you are seeing the world and how you're communicating, conveying that to other people. It is also, particularly in grad school, a very effective and personal activity because it is an extension of you. It's you presenting to people how you view your domain or your research. And as such, it can be difficult to hear feedback, or it can be difficult to take in feedback. And what you need to realize is you're not going to know everything. You're not going to have all the pieces. And that feedback should be a way to help you grow in those respects. And one way to kind of put that in context is this third point here, which is that writing is a social activity. And what I mean by that is that it's got two components. One, it involves perspective taking. Writing is never to empty air. Writing is always to someone, even if that someone is yourself. It is also explicitly social in that it's usually a collaboration. It's an agreement between, at your stage, between you and, say, me as the advisor, but also the people, your readers or your editors or your reviewers. And it's a back and forth negotiation about what points make sense, how do you make arguments, what's coherent, what's a leap, what's reasonable. And these are things that happen all the time. So no one's expecting out of the bat for you to be perfect and have this great argument from the start. It's a back and forth and learning how that happens. And that's been really helpful in my own lab and working with my students, is spending a lot of time at this stage just doing this kind of negotiation back and forth. It's made for some really successful outcomes for us. So I'm a real fan of this. The last point, and this is important, as it gets back to that expertise thing we talked about a minute ago, is that both writing and you as the writer develop over time. Writing is not an inherent talent. People are not born writers. People learn to write. People learn to be good at writing, at whatever genre they're writing in. And that process is hard. It takes revision. It takes going over things. It takes liking some ideas at one point and chucking them in at another point, and being okay with that. And the revision process can be stressful. It can be exhausting because after doing it so many times, you might not be able to know, how else do I look at this? What I would suggest is take breaks, walk away, have a different conversation, come back, and give you that kind of that breather space, because you do need it. You need that kind of downtime to kind of consolidate and then come back. And writing is no different from any other kind of problem solving, is that sometimes you have to walk away and let insight or incubation take place so that you can make those connections. And that's okay. Be okay with doing that. Be okay with just having notes at some point and not being coherent, and then coming back and turning those notes into maybe a sentence or two, and then that becomes a paragraph or an outline. And let that structure kind of build naturally as much as you can, because that's going to make it easier for you to argue and to have something written that others can follow, because you've gone through those steps as well. If you make them explicit, you'll be able to make them explicit for other people. All right. So just some quick notes. So how do we turn this into practice? How do we turn this into things we can do? So the first thing is kind of what we're doing now. Start with conversations. This is something that I have loved doing with my students, and I think you guys will kind of enjoy doing as well. Talk with your advisor. Spend time just talking and generating ideas. And out of that conversation, with these set of questions here, what do we want to say? Who do we want to say to? What do we know? What do they know? What do they need to know? And why? That's an important thing. So it's not just enough to say this is an important article. We have to talk about why this is an important article. What is this telling us that we didn't know before? How is this helping us progress the field? And so these can be conversations. And I would say do this before you put pen to paper. Some of my most successful things have started where we just talk for a while first. We just literally just kind of had a conversation, bouncing ideas. And then after a while we go, okay, let's try to jot some of this down. And that jotting down starts with maybe figures or doodles, and it moves from there. But that initial process of figuring out your argument is so key, and it's been really successful for us. So again, writing is thinking. So if you talk, doing the talking is thinking, and that thinking is going to help you then put it to paper. The next thing, we now have the technology where we can share documents. So we can do lots of things where we can share just sort of your main text, and we can have ancillary stuff on top of that. My favorite thing right now is using the comments. Because that allows us to kind of have a side narrative that's extra to the documents, and it can serve many purposes. I like to use them as kind of an informal outline, where for every paragraph, I have a comment, and that comment tells me the main point of that paragraph. And the idea is you read that, and if there's a gap in the comments where you don't know where that logic was, or how did you get from point A to point C, then that means that's also missing in your main text. So it kind of gives you a running kind of storyboard. The other thing is that also can be notes to you and your other authors. Again, that collaboration part where we need to mention this, or does this need to go here? Those little kind of stage directions when you're writing that can help organize this. Because again, remember, it's starting messy, and that's okay. But the comments can help you leave crumbs to sort of figure out how do we organize this. Other ways you can do this is using color for a number of reasons. One can be accountability if you need to show that everyone's worked on it. The second is so that everyone knows what people are contributing. The third is to kind of know what things are left to do. A standard thing in our lab is that once we finish a section, we turn it to black ink so that we know that part's done, and then the rest is still in color, whoever's got to sign it with color. And that gives us kind of a visual feel for what's going on as well. The last thing is, again, coming back to conversations now that you have something written, is actually reading aloud. And the reason why that helps is because cognitively what happens is that when you're reading stuff silently, your brain corrects for mistakes. So you read things as if they should be rather than how they are. When you read them aloud, it prevents that from happening, so you can hear it. So if you're reading it aloud and something sounds awkward, it's probably awkward in the actual text, and that gives you an idea. You can do this by yourself, or you can do it with someone else. And then, again, assess where you are. Is this where we want to go? Is this the right place? Is this the kind of argument that we want to make? And so we can progress that way. I would repeat this process as much as you need to. When you can, get a fresh pair of eyes to look at it and do the same thing. And importantly, and this is what I want to leave you on here, is that the goal is not perfection. That's the other thing that I think as a grad student myself, and particularly as a minority grad student, I feel like I had this pressure to be perfect from the outset to kind of prove I belong there. Get rid of that. It's not productive. The goal is to provide a reasonable, coherent argument that people can work from. And my little joke here is that reviewer tool will let you know what's missing, which is always the case. So you can't pre-guess. And so don't waste time doing that. Don't try to pre-guess your advisor. Let your advisor tell you what needs to be done. And that helps you progress, helps you from getting stuck in parts. And be okay with sending drafts. Even if they're not finished, send it, because we can work with that. If I don't see anything, I can't help you. So that's the way to think about this. All right, so those are just some tips, and I hope they're useful. We did the exercise when we did this live, and I'll show you the slide real quick. For that is that we've been talking through the series of thinking about yourself growing as a researcher, as a scholar, forming your identity as a future colleague. And so what we did in the past week is talk about some things that make you, or some thought questions about why you for your particular research. For today, now that we've talked about some things, the next step might be now to talk about your research. And so there's some general questions down here on the slide, and you can do this with somebody else or think about it. But it helps you talk about the scope. This is that argument building. So think about what's the goal of what you're doing. Think about where you as a researcher fit, or your lab fits in this particular process. Think about, are there potential alternate camps? Are there people that are going to disagree with you? And then, and particularly important for you guys moving through the graduate program, is thinking about the scope of the problem. Is this the start of something? Is this a practical problem? Is this a long-term problem? And there's relevant times for that. I think for your master's, depending on your program, you want to keep that kind of targeted to a particular area. For your dissertation, it can be a little broader, but also your dissertation, particularly if you're going to go academic, is the jumping point for a longer trajectory of research. So even that doesn't have to be as large as most people think it is. So just some things to think about. Again, I just wanted to share some of these thoughts with you. I hope everyone has gotten something from this. And if you are interested in talking more about this, you can always send me an email. It's smartlj@miamioh.edu. And I'd be happy to converse more with you. So in the meantime, take care, everyone, and I'll see you again.